Let's have a deeper look at some of the issues that are dominating our political scene at the moment. Of course, one of the headlines of today is around the former head of IPID, Robert McBride, and the fact that he did not appear at the Zondo Commission as he was scheduled to. But it also seems the claims against the ANC Secretary-General Ace Magashule are rumbling on. He said today he'll challenge some of the claims made at the Zondo Commission in court. Kyle Cowan is an investigative journalist at News 24. He's on the line for you now. Kyle, good evening. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's start with the fact that Robert McBride did not appear at the Zondo Commission today. The Commission says it's because his legal team's not been able to tell all of the people he'll implicate in his testimony about what he'll say. Are you surprised this has happened? It's the second time his testimony has been postponed.
I'm not surprised. We've seen sort of similar scheduling conflicts with the Zondo Commission before. I think we must just have patience with them. They're trying to manage quite a cumbersome beast in trying to get everyone logistically sorted out and get notices out in time. I think Mr. McBride's testimony is obviously highly anticipated. I think he's going to deliver some very keen insight into sort of state capture at law enforcement agencies especially. And I'd rather they get this one right than try and lose out on some technicalities.
He was in a key position, head of IPID, one of the bodies that was seen as fighting state capture during the time. You say you're expecting quite a lot of explosive evidence. It would seem that he would have knowledge that other people simply would not have. Is that what you're expecting?
Definitely. As you know, IPID is mandated to investigate wrongdoing by our police services. And as we know, over the years, as the state capture machinery has sort of moved into place, it was very key for them to sort of control and capture law enforcement because that allowed them to get away with a lot more. So he's probably going to bring some insight into some of the investigations that IPID was ongoing, some of the difficulties they ran into, the threats, the intimidation, and also the counter campaigns. There were a lot of counter investigations into them. And then, of course, his deteriorating relationship with the current minister, I expect, should be something that will feature as well.
The recent story around Robert McBride's been fascinating. He wanted a second term as the head of IPID. Then the police minister, Becky Cele, said he did not want him. Then eventually Parliament's police committee went along with the minister, and so he's now left. He's challenging that in court. There's a report in the last 24 hours or so he could go to a new ethics unit at the Public Service and Administration Ministry. That would seem to be almost a big comeback, or perhaps an about turn. Do you think that'll happen?
I'm very doubtful at this stage. Look, I think Mr. McBride has served us at IPID very well. I don't think that there's anything too sinister behind the minister not wanting to renew his post. It's possibly more something along the lines of, I would like someone in IPID whom I know, whom I trust, and then we can start looking at the reasons for that. Obviously there are a lot of investigations that Mr. McBride headed up and into very, very serious characters involved in our police service. But at this stage, if he does get a new job in government, I would be quite surprised. It would show that there's definitely a disconnect between some of our cabinet colleagues and our Minister of Police.
It would suggest also perhaps that there are big divisions, perhaps among cabinet and perhaps even within the ANC on the character of Robert McBride.
Definitely, and he's always quite a controversial figure. His history isn't all the best. So we always had this sort of doubt surrounding Mr. McBride. But his term at IPID, I can't really think of any examples offhand where we've seen Mr. McBride being seriously compromised by any of the state capture machinery. Instead, he's sort of been seen as one of the last bastions of, trying to do the right thing, trying to investigate wrongdoing by law enforcement agencies. So it comes as no surprise, I suppose, during this whole fight back from, former ANC factions that someone like Mr. McBride would want to be moved aside. He holds the key to some very, very serious issues that a lot of people would much rather be swept under the carpet, especially with elections just around the corner.
Let's talk a little bit about the figure of ANC Secretary-General Ace Magashule. Now, of course, there was the launch of that book 10 days ago now, or sort of 8 days ago, called Gangster State by Peter Louis Myburg, a colleague of yours. Then there was testimony on Friday from a former Free State MEC, Mxolisi Dokwana. Today, there's a report that Ace Magashule said he would go to court to challenge the evidence at the Zondo Commission. In other words, he won't go to the Zondo Commission himself. He'll actually go to court to challenge the testimony there. He's also said he'll go to court over that book. Are you expecting substantial legal action from him?
Well, he's certainly making all the right noises in that direction, but Whether it's actually going to happen remains to be seen, Stephen. I don't think that it's a very good idea for Ace Magashule to actually try and sue anyone for defamation, because, the parameters to prove defamation in the court of law are very stringent, and it opens you up to all sorts of discovery issues, and people can then say, okay, well, we need these documents and that document, and the onus is really on you to prove that the claims are false. And that's quite difficult, considering the wealth of evidence that's now mounting against Ace Magashule, that has been mounting over the past, say, 10 years. I think it would be very difficult for him to argue a case successfully in court. He might be able to argue some sort of legal, technical arguments, surrounding not being notified in time at the Zondo Commission. But I don't think the courts are going to be very willing to try and step in now, and set this sort of precedent for others to also challenge testimony at the Zondo Commission in the court. I think what's more likely to happen is that the court's going to tell him, look, the Zondo Commission is a judicial inquiry. Why don't you go there and raise your issues? Why don't you go and sort it out there, and then if you still do not have recourse, then you can come back to us.
Kyle, I realise you work for News 24, and I'm sure you saw the story from your colleagues and rivals at the Sunday Times about Gaddafi's gold, the claim that millions of dollars went from Libya to Nkandla and then to Eswatini. Yesterday, the Minister of International Relations, Lindiwe Sisulu, poured cold water on it. Today, at least twice, the Minister of Small Business Development, but also the chair of the ANC's International Relations Subcommittee, Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu, she's poured cold water on it. How do you feel about this story? Does it tie together for you? Are you seeing strong evidence that this might all have happened, that money went literally from Gaddafi to Nkandla to Eswatini?
I'm in very much two minds about this story. The Gaddafi millions and the gold and the diamonds, it's sort of a sexy story that turned into an urban myth that's sort of been around for a very long time. And I think we need to exercise an extreme amount of caution leading up to an election, in terms of stories like these, because obviously it paints Mr. Zuma, our former president, in a very bad light. But I didn't see anything in the Sunday Times story. With all due respect to my colleagues, there was nothing in that story that totally 100% convinced me that there was, this $30 million, this 420 million rand in cash stashed in a bunker at Nkandla. It just doesn't make sense. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm also very much wouldn't be surprised if it was. But I think we have to remember, Stephen, is at the time, Mr. Gaddafi and Mr. Zuma, they weren't getting along very well. There were some issues with NATO, there were some issues at the UN, and certain votes that didn't go certain ways. And then there was that phone call, I think it was around about 2009, where President Zuma at the time felt that, Mr. Gaddafi was actually speaking down to him a little bit, and it wasn't very friendly towards the end of the phone call, if my memory serves me correctly from what I've read. And I just don't see it happening. There's always been this rumor about Gaddafi having gold here and money there and all sorts of things. But I've spoken to some people who were sort of in law enforcement surrounding that time, and the general feeling is that those were just rumors, and the real money came when it was brought through legitimate sort of channels, through the banks, through front companies and that sort of thing. And the understanding is that money has been recovered.
Kyle Cowan, thanks very much indeed, an investigative journalist at News 24.